Welcome to Dear Diaspora, a podcast celebrating the African diaspora and the change makers, innovators, and entrepreneurs working to make our world a better one to live in. I'm your host, Ndulwa Kowa. Let's get started. Welcome to season 3 of the show. I am so excited to be back with brand new episodes of Dear Diaspora. If you're a new listener, thank you for tuning in. Be sure to follow the podcast on social media at Dear Diaspora for updates, special announcements, interesting content from across the African diaspora, and much more. All right, so before we get into the episode, I am so excited to share that there's now a way you can officially support the show. Dear Diaspora is now on Patreon. Patreon allows you to support your favorite content creators, and in exchange, you get exclusive content only available to you via the Patreon platform. I'll be putting out bonus episodes and video interviews on there, and you also get access to podcast merch and opportunities to become a part of the show by either becoming a guest contributor or a guest collaborator. I would love your support as I continue to grow the show, so please visit patreon.com/deardiaspora. That's patreon.com/deardiaspora, or check out the link in the show notes to learn more and become a patron today. Diaspora fam, thank you so much for tuning in to episode 53 of the show. I cannot believe it is already December 15th and we are just 2 weeks away from the end of 2020. I've been saying this all year pretty much, but this year has just gone by so fast. 2020 has just been one of those years where I think the biggest lesson I've learned is that you just really cannot plan life. I've been just working away, looking forward to wrapping up projects at work and getting ready for my trip to Ghana, when I got a call letting me know that my uncle back home in Zambia suddenly passed away. And this year has already been just so difficult for so many people. And the one thing I've been thankful for is that my family's been good and that my family's been all right. And then I get that news, and then a year that already didn't make much sense and already was just full of grief just became that much worse for me personally. And so with that said, this will be the last episode of season 3, and I'm going to be heading home to Zambia to spend some much needed time with my family. I hope you all have a safe and wonderful next few weeks, off of work, off of school, with your loved ones, whatever it is that you intend to do these next few weeks. I hope that you take care of yourself and take care of those that you care about the most. I look forward to being back in 2021 with fresh content and new episodes and new topics. I'm looking to experiment a little bit and go beyond entrepreneurship and innovation, and yes, I can't wait to share it with you all. If you haven't already, be sure to check out the other episodes this season. Follow Dear Diaspora on social media. We are active on Twitter, Instagram, LinkedIn, and Facebook. And be sure to subscribe to the newsletter. The link for that is in the show notes. I typically make really big podcast announcements there. I share a bit more about other projects I work on outside of the podcast there. And I also kind of give my take on current events and just things that are happening in the news in the newsletter as well. So be sure to subscribe for that. And also, I can't forget to ask for y'all to leave a review on Apple Podcasts. It makes a huge difference, and I really enjoy reading your reviews and just hearing what you think about the show. So before the end of the year, my challenge to you, or my ask, is for you to leave a review on Apple Podcasts. Today's guest is Lee Ngwenya. She is a writer, documentary filmmaker, and host of Conversations with Leelabee, a podcast covering topics ranging from entrepreneurship to mental health. So, Lee was born in Zimbabwe but raised in Zambia and knew early on that a traditional career path was not for her. She went to school in North Carolina for social work, but quickly realized that film was her actual passion. She then went on to study film in Cape Town, South Africa, and her training in South Africa has landed her gigs in South Africa, Kenya, and now Zambia. When she's not writing or working on documentaries, she is one of 4 directors on the Zambian TV show Amoye. Tune in to hear more about what Lee's 2020 was like, how she's navigating Zambia's creative scene, the 2 sides of Cape Town that often aren't really talked about, upcoming African creative projects you should know about, and which conversations with Leelabee episode to listen to first, and much more. Without further ado, here's our conversation. Lee, thank you so much for being a guest on Dear Diaspora. I'm so excited to chat with you.
Oh, Ndulwa, thank you so much for having me on Dear Diaspora. I'm very excited to be on the podcast. I've been listening, and I think you interview amazing people, so I know I'm in great company.
Oh, awesome. So before we dive into the questions, I have to ask, how are you doing? The year is almost over, thank goodness, and it was one of the most, I guess, just interesting years. How are you doing? How have you been handling everything?
I think I'm doing really, really well. And for someone who has mental health struggles, I think that's amazing that I've been doing really well, but I think I've been putting in the tools I've learned in therapy to sort of with my anxiety to manage that and also to manage like my depression. I think it's all about having the right support system. And I know it's been isolating being in this whole COVID-19 situation, but it's also allowed me to, although work kind of in terms of like filmmaking kind of came to like a standstill, it's allowed me to focus more on my podcast and grow that content and figure out cool ways of like interviewing people without having to be face to face with them. It
Mm,
also, my dad came to visit just before South Africa went into lockdown, so he's been here. So that's been like good bonding experience, and also I haven't been alone. So it's been bumpy, and financially, you might blow through some savings and be wondering when you're gonna, make some more money, and maybe you had plans for that money. Like I know I had plans for money that I had, and I also had planned vacations and
mm,
fun things to do and with my life in 2020. So I think um, that aside, the disappointment aside, I think the only thing that I could do was just kind of embrace the situation, accept it for what it is, and try and just do my best to stay safe, stay sane, and be happy. And I think, yeah, that comes down to a lot of tools I learned in therapy, comes down to a lot of meditation has been happening, a lot of journaling, and a lot of yoga.
mm. Wow. That's so awesome. I'm glad you were able to, find ways to kind of deal with just the stressors of 2020, and take care of yourself. That's so awesome. Are things back to normal right now, or?
We pretty much closed restaurants, they closed bars and nightclubs. Um, that maybe was like for 3 months, 3.5. Then they opened up restaurants again. And of course, with that comes the complexity of places that are restaurants but happen to have a bar. How do you navigate that? Because it's not just a bar. So there
Mm-hmm,
was a lot of like contention about that, and people were outraged and worried and saying, if people start convening over alcohol, that means their inhibitions are lower and they're
mm,
probably going to get close to each other. They won't abide by social distancing. People, will want to get physical with each other, whether that's in a good way or a bad way. So there was that happened. But I think people tried to maintain social distancing. There was the messaging around it. I know it was very difficult, and and still is, because the pandemic isn't over, it's still difficult for people who live in what we call like the compound, which would be, I guess, the low income areas, because
Mm-hmm.
generally you'll find it can be 10 people in one household, like 10 people even to like a room,
Mm.
essentially, or like a one bedroom. So I think whether in their family or whatever, and people have to also go out and make a living and they use public transport. And I think those circumstances made it difficult for those people to socially distance. But I'm not really aware of like cases. I can't speak on that. I know that our ministry was telling us at one point, we had some low numbers. We've definitely had lower numbers than the Western world,
Mm.
but I can't factually say anything because I don't know that, we were in every single province looking at every single level, income level, and socioeconomic demographic to really understand how COVID impacted us. But
Mm.
I'm just grateful I've managed to stay safe. There were 2 weeks where I was down with a bad flu in the beginning, but I was already self isolating. And so I kind of just continued to do that. So I don't really know if I had COVID or not. And being in Zambia, tests are a bit pricey. And even I did go and have a test, but the results were negative. But at that time, there was also like a story about, are these results really negative? Are these faulty test kits? And I know now you can like check for antibodies, but I'm not really sure where to do that in Zambia, or to find out like, oh, did I have it? Didn't I? I just know that I kept my distance from everyone, and I'm fine now, and I've been fine.
Mm.
And I guess I don't know, when I figure out if I can actually find out if I had it, then I'll do that.
Right, right. Okay, interesting. Yeah, because I mean, from what I've seen on social media, things look very much back to normal in Zambia, and I've
Yeah.
been I've been so jealous of seeing people at like events. And you mentioned you even, had an event earlier today. I'm like, wow, I miss events.
Well, that being said, I mean, I think everybody should still be socially distancing. I don't advise going for like a concert or like a major event. But yeah,
Hmm.
people here, I mean, the clubs are open, people are clubbing. I don't really know. I mean, we might see a spike. I hear that there is definitely a surge that's been happening in South Africa. I've got a couple of family members and friends who are medical doctors both in Cape Town and Johannesburg, and the numbers of COVID patients in hospitals are increasing on the daily. And I think that also comes down to like, in this part of the world, it's like, it's festive season. It's what we call K December. Like everybody
Mm.
wants to party, everybody wants to have fun. And I think everyone is at, it's been, I don't even know how many months has it been of this whole
S-
situation.
like 9.
Easily 9 months or
Yeah.
more. So I think people are restless, and that's not an excuse for you to be reckless. But at the same time, I don't know how you can control everyone unless, you say, okay, full on proper lockdown. Because I do see a lot of people don't necessarily take it seriously. You see people walking with like the mask on their chin, or not wearing a mask until they reach like the
Oh
grocery store, like here in Lusaka at the mall. They'll be walking around without one and then only put it on to get into a store. And I'm like, that's not the purpose of the mask, though. It's not
oh
just like a whole,
gosh.
like, this is how you enter a building. No, no, no. You should be wearing that the whole time. And truth be told, for me, I've worn all kinds of different masks, and I've had to go sit socially distanced in like workshops. And I've been able to breathe through my mask and spend a whole day wearing my mask. So I
Mm.
don't know. I think people are just stubborn and people are fed up.
Man, I totally understand. I think people are just like, okay, can this be over? Same thing here, like right around Thanksgiving time, like late November, people just, it's almost like they wanted to just take a break. And people
Mm.
started, traveling, people started like flying, really flying across the country to, visit their families and things. And it's like, we're still in the middle of a pandemic, but I think, yeah, people are just like, dang, like, can this be over? Like, I just want to go back to normal. So, like you said, it's hard to control folks when there's no actual strict lockdown. Um, but I don't know. I'm hopeful that things will be different next year, and with this with this vaccine that they're trying to roll out here in the U.S., I'm hopeful that that'll at least get our numbers down a little bit. But we are still in the thick of it on this side.
Yeah, I mean, we hear that you guys have a vaccine. It seems everyone seems to have some sort of vaccine. So all the best to all of you with testing that and going through that. We'll catch you on the other side when it's like verified that it's not gonna, I don't know, make me infertile in like 10
Oh
years.
my God.
I'm not anti-vaccine, don't get me wrong, because I don't want to spread that message. Vaccines are important, and I hope that we find one that works for COVID. But I'm also very wary and cautious of whether it's being a test subject or trying something when I haven't seen a big enough sample size do it yet. So yeah, I will just
Yeah,
continue to wash my hands, wear a mask, and try to be as socially distant as I can within reason.
absolutely, absolutely. And yeah, like people are like, oh, like, when once we get the vaccine, that means we don't have to wear masks or social distance. But it's like, no, that doesn't mean that. Not everyone's gonna get the vaccine. They're prioritizing, certain, populations first. So we're gonna have to keep doing this for a long time, honestly, I think. So um, anywho, enough about COVID. Let's dive into a little bit about your background. Like, I know you've lived in different African countries. I'd love for you to kind of expand on that and share just kind of your journey.
Okay, well, I'm Zimbabwean, but I was born there. I was born in Harare, but my parents are both from Bulawayo, and they were already living in Zambia when I was born. So basically, I grew up in Zambia. I consider myself Zambian and Zimbabwean. Um, I always say Zimbabwean first though, because that's also like I speak Ndebele and that's my home language. I don't really necessarily speak a Zambian language. So I grew up here and I basically went to like the same school my whole life, from like kindergarten into like high school. And then when I graduated when I was 18, I actually moved to the States. So I went to North Carolina to study social work. And then I did enjoy that and I really like did so well in like psychology and stuff, but I realized it wasn't really the thing I wanted to do. So I basically quit that, applied to film school on like a whim and in secret because my dad was basically like, you need to actually go back to school. So I don't know what you thought you were doing, but you need to figure it out, because he was like, you're not going to be out of school. I mean, sorry, you're not going to be out of school for like 6 months or more. So I applied to a college, a film school in Cape Town called AFTA. I actually applied to the Joburg campus, and then I went to the Joburg campus, and then I was like, yeah, I don't know if this is for me. It was a little bit like, I think also I had never really lived in Joburg. I'd grown up visiting, but like whenever I was there, I'd be like in a certain neighborhood. So you're like in Kilani or you're like in Santon. You're not having to travel across town or thinking about like, oh, how am I going to drive myself to class every day? Like those roads were very scary because in Zambia we have infrastructure, but we don't have major highways. So I just remember feeling like, yeah, no, Joburg is going to be a bit much. Like the traffic situation, no. And
Mhm.
then I decided I visited Cape Town a few years back, and I really loved the fact that there's like the beach, the sort of city, the forest, the mountains, everything is sort of like within like 15 minutes if you live in like the city bowl area. So I was like, oh, that seems like the perfect place for me to be, because I do love city life, but I also love nature and I love the beach because I love the water. So I decided, okay, let's try Cape Town. So I studied there and everything. And when I was there, I was doing acting and music and script writing. So I did three subjects as my main subjects. And yeah, so I graduated around 2008, tried to do some like acting and essay, quickly found that there are a lot of girls who look like me and then
Mm.
who obviously could speak more South African languages and better than I could because I can speak a bit of Zulu, but not that well. It's similar to Ndebele, but it has its differences. Um, so, I wasn't necessarily booking roles. And I was like, oh, this is soul crushing. And I know you can keep auditioning and maybe your time will come and your role will come. But after doing like some bit parts and being an extra and whatnot, I was like, okay, what am I really gonna do within the film industry? So at that point, that is when I actually moved to Kenya, but I moved to Kenya to go do a communications job.
Mhm.
And that was working with an NGO, but it was like to do with film and media, that kind of communications. So that's what I was doing. And then I shot a documentary with my friend Zoe Flood. At the time, she wasn't my friend, but now we are friends. um, where I was basically her production assistant. So I had never really shot a documentary because, like in film school, we did fictional stuff most of the time. And I know we did like a mockumentary, but we never did documentary. So it was a steep learning curve, but I found it fascinating. And I really sort of fell in love with the storytelling element of, or rather, the human side of the storytelling, in terms of like being able to tell the stories of actual people, like everyday people.
Mm.
And so, yeah, that's kind of where my love for documentary began. And yeah, I lived in Kenya for a while. After that, came back to South Africa, lived in Pretoria and Joburg. Oh, worked in Pretoria, sorry, lived in Joburg. And yeah, I just kind of found myself working again, more documentary stuff for like a TV station. And then I was kind of like, I miss Zambia. I hear that there's a growing sort of art scene or film scene. Let me go find out what it's about. Now, mind you, I've been away for like, at this point, I don't even know, 8 years or more,
Mm.
possibly 10. No, less than 10 years. So maybe 8 years, 9 years. And I'm like, okay, I'm coming back home. And basically, all my friends, because I went to an international school, they're all over the world. They're not necessarily living here. So, like, I moved back. I don't know anyone. I don't even know where to start, like, figuring out, like, who's doing film. So I just start, like, Googling things and trying to, like, find things. And I end up meeting these two fabulous women who I'm now friends with, Thea and Becky. And they're like, we're doing an arts festival. And I was like, wait, what do you mean an arts festival? They were like, well, it's like music and actual visual art, and it incorporates film, and we're working on the film side. And we heard that because when I first came here, I worked under a man called Mr. Lawrence Thompson. He's very well known, and I worked as a production manager for him. So basically, we all got connected through that. And so that job had ended after less than a year. And I was like, what am I going to do? How do I like break into the scene? And my friends were like, well, Becky and Say at the time were like, we're doing this whole arts festival. Would you come on to help us with film? Would you be like an assistant acting coach to Abina Ivor, who's like this amazing actress who works in South Africa and actually has like Zambian roots? And yeah, she's been on Issy Dingo and a bunch of other shows. So and Generations, and yeah, I can't remember the Netflix show she was on, but anyway, amazing actress. So yeah, I helped her do the workshops, and that's kind of where I got back into sort of helping other people become better performers and sort of acting coaching. So that's kind of my African journey with
Wow.
film and art. Yeah.
Wow. Wow. Thank you so much for sharing more about your journey. Which African city was your favorite to live in and why?
I do not like this question because I grew up going to Kenya and I love Nairobi, but also my favorite place in Kenya is Mombasa because we always used to holiday there. But but I love Cape Town. I don't want to answer this question because it brings up a lot. I'll say I love Nairobi because I love the people. I love the food. I love the culture. Same goes for Mombasa. And then I would say I love Cape Town because I just love the fact that like it's filled with a bunch of eclectic, wild, free people who are just like the ultimate like in creatives, and it's very like laid back in terms of lifestyle, but also fast paced in terms of like creativity and the amount of like art and things that you get exposed to and that you're able to consume. So I
Mm.
think that Cape Town has my heart just because it's really where I started playing around with like what do I want to be and what do I want to do, and where I started seeing other creatives like push boundaries, and I started rethinking, my own boundaries and my own ideas about what it is to be a creative person.
I've heard really good things about Cape Town. I'd love to visit, but I've also heard a lot about like just the racial dynamics and inequality that's like super just obvious when you land there or when you spend time there. Um, could you?
Yeah, no, that's definitely 100% a whole entire thing. Sadly, when I was young when I lived there. I think I was in my 20s, and I had I'd grown up in Zambia and I'd had white friends, and then I had white friends in South Africa. So, if you sort of go places with them, maybe the reason you're being led into those places is because you're with them or
Mm,
whatever it is. But so you don't really paint a clear picture of what's going on. So I think only towards the end of my years in Cape Town was I like, oh, like, I mean, of course I knew about the socioeconomic and different racial inequalities that existed because they are so glaringly obvious. You definitely can tell that, like, you know, um, certain people live in one side of like Cape Town and other people live in another, and they're very ostracized, and that the rich white people, live in Camps Bay and all the fancy areas. So you can definitely like see that with your eyes. But I think in terms of even just coming across microaggressions, I know that I did, especially because I wasn't even South African. So that was also weird because I had like xenophobic microaggressions that would happen to me. And I was like, oh,
wow.
great. I'm like, guys, really? Do you not think you're going through enough, like dealing with racism? Now you want to be xenophobic? I was like, come on, we're kind of in this together. Because just by looking at me and the fact that I can speak a little bit of Zulu, people generally do assume that I'm South African because I have those features. Because
Mm,
technically, through my great 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 grandparents, I am South African. But it was just
mm.
like a very complex thing to deal with. So I was dealing with like things like xenophobia before it was, because I actually was living in Cape Town when some of the first xenophobic attacks happened. And of course, I'm Zimbabwean, so we were like the main targets of that.
Mm.
So that's a lot of the other pain that I sort of felt at the time and a lot of the discomfort. But yes, there is a lot of just I don't know. I don't want to speak for South Africans. So that's the only thing. Like, I don't
Mm.
want them to come after me and attack me. But yes, something definitely does have to be done in terms of the racism because it's so pervasive, and I know 2020 has been this year where, especially in America, there's been Black Lives Matter. It's existed for so long,
Mm.
but with George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, it's become a conversation, a much larger conversation. It's not even a conversation. It's become a much larger movement, and everyone was talking about it. Even white people were talking about it, even when it made them uncomfortable. And people are trying to, obviously enact laws and outlaw things. And I think even in South Africa, the same kinds of things are being mirrored and have been mirrored for a very long time. You know, I think definitely people of color in South Africa, meaning colored people and Black people, have been marginalized. And I
Mm,
think that they do deserve some kind of justice, and even racial things even aside, or also it does have to do with race, but our women are dying because there's just so much femicide. Like men are raping and murdering young and even older and whatever age of women, like every single day. It's like a headline in South Africa. So I think those are like some of the social issues that really need to be dealt with, and I hope that they will be dealt with in even in the next like year, 2 years. I mean, it's going to take consistent work, but I think
mm,
it's important work because I think everyone has the right to feel safe, to feel comfortable. Everyone has the right to be able to access healthcare, better like accommodation and education, better jobs, and it shouldn't be based on the color of your skin, especially when it's actually on your own continent. Like that makes no sense to me.
that that's the thing. It's just, I mean, racism is everywhere, obviously. Like wherever there are white people, there's racism and inequality. But just how like drastic it is, like in South Africa, and how like I think ridiculous it is that that's happening. Like, imagine being in your own country and like the people in power and the people who have, all the wealth and resources don't look like you, but you're the majority. Like, I think that's just so wild. Um, and so, not to single out Cape Town specifically, because I know it's a problem everywhere, but I just wanted to touch on that just because I've seen so many conversations
Mm.
happening just everywhere about it.
Well, I also just want to say it's as good as saying, okay, fine, we stop Jim Crow law. It's the same as saying, okay, truth and reconciliation. Were those things done the right way? Were they implemented the right way? Because we can't just say, okay, let's tell the truth, let's forgive, because it's deeper than forgiveness. We actually need to
Mm,
stamp out systemic racism. So I think that's the problem, is all the things that different countries that struggle with racial issues and racial tensions have done is they've tried to be like, okay, well, we're just going to declare racism is over. And everyone,
mm,
you guys, you agree, right? Publicly? Okay, let's move on. And it's like, no, 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 no. People might agree publicly for political reasons and whatever else, but they're still racists. Like, racists are everywhere.
yeah.
So it's like, until we actually figure out that problem, and like end racism, then it's consistently going to be something that is pervasive in our societies.
Right. Totally. And it's like, what happens after, these pacts or like acts are like passed? It's like we need like material changes. Like, is there like an actual transfer of like wealth? Like, are people given like housing, like,
Yeah.
or capital, or just something, tangible to, I guess, remove them from the margins or just kind of get them on like an upward trajectory? Like if none of that is happening and you're just saying like, "Oh, we've reconciled and we've forgiven each other." It's like, "No." Like what else is there for folks? I guess we've gotten sidetracked a little bit, but
Yes.
so let's go back to, so you moved to Zambia and you kind of are getting into like the, art scene, the film scene. How aside, the festival that you mentioned, like how else have you kind of gotten to where you are today? Like, is Zambia a good place to be for film? Like, if you want to be a filmmaker or an artist, like, is Zambia a place people should consider?
Well, I think people from outside of Zambia come here all the time to shoot projects, whether it's for TV, whether it's documentary film. People do come, whether it's a Netflix film. What was that horrible Netflix Operation Dumbo Drop or something, with the lady from Sex and the City that they filmed some
Oh,
scenes here in Zambia. Yeah.
I think I remember
So
seeing that, but I haven't I remember hearing about it, but I haven't watched it.
like foreigners come and use this country as a backdrop all the time.
Mm,
As indigenous people or as people who've grown up here, I think, and just speaking on behalf of like Black African people here, I think we are definitely making a lot of movies. We're definitely trying to tell our own stories. But to do it on a bigger scale, it then comes down to financing and how much money. And here we don't have things like wealthy studios. We don't have like a Warner Brothers, a
mm,
Fox. We also don't have our own version of like a Netflix. We have local TV stations that kind of do a little bit of content here or there, but also again, we lean on our neighbors, which would be South Africa, in terms of using um, Zambezi Magic, which is a platform on DSTV, and
mm,
basically like under the Mnet umbrella. And that's basically how people get a lot of the Zuba shows made, which is like a telenovela. Then last year and into this year, I was directing a TV series called Amoye, and that was also on DSTV on Zambezi Magic. So I think a lot of things come down to funding because there is talent. There's also a lack of training because we don't really have very formal, we don't have a film school per
mm,
se. We don't have somewhere where people can learn like the skills that I learned in film school, like whether it's script writing, there were different departments. People were studying and majoring in editing, directing, producing, costume design, set design, makeup, special effects, visual
mm,
effects. There's so many things that encompass filmmaking and even TV that I think people here are just, they're teaching themselves, they're self-taught, or if they are fortunate enough to have the opportunity to step outside of Zambia and go and study, they do that. But I do think we have a little bit of a way to go in terms of our skill level matching
mm,
up to other countries. But we do have quite like there's a small number of people who are really talented at very like sort of niche things like your special effects and maybe your lighting and whatever else. But I
mm,
do think that we are trying to tell our own stories, and I see young filmmakers making strides in that. We have a huge surge in terms of Zambian YouTubers. There's a lot, like digital is big. So there are
mm,
actually like a lot of Zambian YouTubers at the moment, YouTubing on different things, whether it's like makeup, there's people who do YouTube sort of tutorials on different hairstyles, whatever. There's people who do like financial sort of, I guess, workshops or whatever online or tutorials about like finances, how to manage your money. There's people who do ones about like how to manage your social media and they teach you about marketing. There's people who share hacks, tips, and tricks. Then there's a bunch of, podcasters like myself. I'm not yet on YouTube in that capacity, but there's some people who actually shoot their podcast episodes as well as have like the
mm,
audio, they have the visual. So I think people are definitely taking advantage of digital because people are also doing short films on that platform.
mm,
But in terms of getting it to be to an international level, that might take some time. But I mean, we also do have what is it? Is it Mama K Superheroes? I always forget what it's called, and I totally apologize to the woman who has created the animated show that'll be Zambia's first animated show on Netflix.
oh yes, I remember reading about her.
I actually auditioned for to do a voiceover because I do
What?
voiceovers as well. But yeah, didn't hear back. Probably didn't get the role. So, you win some, you lose some.
Oh man. I remember reading about her and I was so excited, but she's like completely kind of off the grid unless, she's because I tried to reach
Yeah,
out to her, but I could not find her anywhere.
Well, I happen to know someone who's related to her, but unrelated to that. Like, I mean, I wasn't really trying to like stalk her like that. Yeah, her name is Malenga Mulendema. Yeah,
Yes.
Malenga Mulendema. So she is basically the creator of the show, and it's great for Zambia, I think, and especially because it's animation, how exciting, because I
Mm,
know a lot of the work that we even do in Zambia that we release is always live action, like so with real people. And
mm,
it tends to be like on the side of like drama or telenovela. So like how awesome to have like an animated show basically for all ages that's like female centered on like four superheroes and they're all black superheroes. It's set in Zambia, and yeah, I think that's going to be something that I'm looking forward to watching. I think that's going to be a big move for Zambia. And then I know Black Dollar just premiered, which is another Zambian movie made by Kazadi Films. It
oh,
came out in November. So that movie is also set to debut on Netflix, but I have no idea of the actual timeline with that because now we're in December and I don't think I've seen it on Netflix yet. But it
mm,
might come out next year because sometimes these deals take some time. I mean, look at what happened with Cook Off, the Zimbabwean film. You know, they shot that in like 2017 and couldn't really release it and whatnot.
wow.
Faced their own different challenges and then wanted to release it, and there's a pandemic, and then Netflix buys it and they do a deal with Netflix, and now it's going to be on there for I think about a year. So it came out during the pandemic in June, and that's like a fun, again, different kind of storytelling that depicts just Africans and even Zimbabweans in such a nice, beautiful, positive light because it's a romantic comedy. So it's not about the whole, there are elements of like, oh, the reality of, people aren't necessarily all living this wealthy lifestyle, but it's also just like heartwarming, and it's more about the characters and their relationships than it is about like any sort of socioeconomic turmoil and all the headlines that you read about Zimbabwe. So I do think African filmmakers are making great strides.
What are some of your other favorite Zambian productions and like where can people around the world watch them?
Oh gosh. I mean, obviously, I love the drama series Amoye because I don't just love the actresses and actors and the whole team behind it, but I did direct. So, but
Yes.
that's not necessarily available internationally. I think that's one of the other struggles that we have is when content is either bought by or owned by a certain entity, it kind of then is locked into staying into the region, and it's not necessarily given digital release or worldwide release due
Mm,
to whatever the contract setup is. So a lot of the time you'll find, people outside of sub-Saharan Africa can't access certain content. So like we have DSTV throughout most parts of Africa, which is the South African owned entity that I spoke about earlier. So we have Zambezi Magic, right? And they also have their Nzanzi Magic, which would be their South African version. Here in Zambia, I can watch both Zambezi Magic and Nzanzi Magic. In South Africa, they can't access Zambezi Magic because that's a platform for us. But in
mm,
Zimbabwe, some Zimbabweans can access Zambezi Magic. But you go to Kenya, you can't access Zambezi, and I don't think you can access Nzanzi. Like it's very, I don't really understand the algorithm and the mechanisms and the marketing and the whatevers behind it. But I do think that's one of the things that sort of holds us back. I think we have to put systems in place, lawmaking. I mean, I know that maybe a few months ago I would have spoken about SAG and said, look, America has SAG and they like have health coverage and they do this and it's unionized and that's what we need. But with what SAG has recently done to actors in America, I'm just like, oh, well, I don't know how we actually move forward as creatives because they've literally gone back on a lot of their word, which means like people who are now have been SAG members their whole entire lives, have done work in the entertainment industry, and are now retired, aren't entitled to like healthcare and so many other things.
Oh.
So I think, oh yeah, like a very heated debate. You can Google what's going on with SAG. There's quite a few not outspoken. They're just like actually just speaking up.
Mm.
Different actors. Mark Hamill from Star Wars, you might know him as Luke Skywalker. If you follow him on Twitter, he's part of like a campaign to do with this whole SAG situation. Sophia Bush, just a whole bunch of different actors and actresses are kind of speaking out because there was sort of some reworking of the SAG. There was like a reshuffle within SAG, and then also reworking of, I don't want to be I don't want to say the wrong thing, but like policy, I guess I would call it, or whatever it is.
Mm.
And people didn't know, and then it was like, oh, you can vote on this, you can vote on that, and then it came down that like decisions were made which are not actually to the greater benefit of performers, and not just performers, because SAG isn't just about actors, it's also about your crew members. So whether it's your key grip, your lighting guy, whoever it is, people who really rely on these jobs, everyone's kind of been negatively impacted by the decisions that SAG decided to make. So yeah, I don't really
Wow.
know how
Oh,
to fix
wow.
the problem. Before I would have been like, let's form a union. Now I'm like, woo, do we need a union? We need some sort of structure though.
Mm. And if you were to, let's say you got funding like um $1 million, or that might be a lot, but let's say you got a significant amount of funding. What would you create, or what would you do with it?
Oh, that's so hard. What would I do with it? I'd probably want to help set up something where I can educate other people in filmmaking. Like not myself, because I don't mean like I should teach everybody everything, because trust me, I'm no expert. I mean like set up a school or something. But if we're talking about creatively, and you said $1 million is a lot, it's really not for the movie that I want to shoot. I have the script that I wrote ages ago that it's kind of unfinished, because that's what writers do. Sometimes we just don't finish things. And it's a sci-fi. So like I
Oh.
think that $1 million I would need it all, because I need visual effects, and I need to hire, I don't even know where I'm finding the best visual effects person if they're not coming from another country. I don't know. I'd have
Mm.
to do my research, because I don't even know. I'm sure there's someone on the African continent who can achieve or get close to what I want to achieve, but I'm talking like some epic, I don't know how to describe it, J.J. Abrams, Steven Spielberg.
Okay.
It's a little dystopian. It's a little not really out of space, but it's very dystopian, very, very, very sci-fi, the project that I have in mind. So I think that would be interesting, because also just another, it's like a black sci-fi story. I don't know.
I
I
would
think
love to
people would
see
want to
that.
see it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Like, I'm here for all the different types of content that people are wanting to put out and people are currently putting out. Um, I just love anything that shows how multifaceted, how diverse we are, how like creative we are. So I would love to see that. I'll put it out there for you, I guess, just into the universe, that you
Ooh,
somehow land on $1 million and you're able to produce something
I
like
receive,
that.
I receive, I receive.
Yes. Wow. And what would you say excites you about Africa's future in the creative space and then also just in general?
I think what excites me is just that I think we have so much passion. We're like burning with passion to like showcase ourselves and showcase where we come from and our cultures, our communities, our genders, or if we're non-binary, our whatever, our humanity in so many different ways, through so many different forms of art. I think that's literally what inspires me, because I think there's so many good stories, and there's so much good, as much as there's sadness and things like femicide, and even with the feminist movement, you know, the sort of constant battle that feminists throughout Africa are going through in terms of trying to enact and change and enact laws, and you know, the whole in West Africa, sex for grades, all these different scandals and things that are happening, that are, or truths that are coming to light that are not necessarily positive, I think are actually inspiring and impactful, because the people who are now behind the change and behind these movements are, you know, they're leaders, they're visionaries, they're people that one day I'm sure we're going to write movies about. They're people who are
Mm.
also just, you know, doing, trying to correct the wrongs of the past, and trying to build a better future for our future daughters and generations. And I think those are the things, like, as much as there can be bad things, I always try and look and say, well, what are the positives of this? The positives are that, you know, there's more women fighting against inequality and injustice. There are more people having conversations about this. There are more stories being told about it, which means there's also going to be more art that comes out of it, that's about it, or that's about the change that eventually happens. So for me, it's always kind of beautiful in its own way.
Mm. I'm also excited about just what's to come, and also just all of the movements that we're seeing across the continent, um, and the people in the future that are going to write about these movements, or create movies, or documentaries about these movements. I think that'll be really, really cool to
And even
see.
just write books.
Yes.
Like, whoever's gonna like write the literature, like the person who's been on the ground or whatever and seeing everything, and decides to write, whether it's a autobiographical or it's a biography of someone else, or it's fictional or loosely based on the truth. I think there's just so much that can come out of the different revolutions that we're having throughout the continent, and I think it can be positive, and it doesn't all have to be. We've already gone through the negative. I think we have to, if anything, come out on the positive side.
Mm, absolutely. And where can people find your podcast, listen to it, and then where can people follow you?
So my podcast is called Conversations with Leelabee. That's Conversations with Leelabee. And I've got a link tree, which will basically, if you know what link tree is, it's type in link tr and then .ee/conversations Leelabee, and then you'll find different links to my podcast, because it's on Anchor FM, it's on Apple Podcasts, it's on Spotify, Google, SoundCloud, Overcast, Stitcher, Breaker, Radio Public. It's everywhere.
Yes.
But if you want to follow me on social media, that's at Conversations with Leelabee on Instagram. It's also at, I think it's Convos W Leelabee. That's on Twitter. But if you just type in Conversations with Leelabee, or find me on Instagram, it'll link you to like my Twitter. It'll link you to, you know, the podcast site, and you can have a listen to all the different amazing guests I've had this year. I just did my last episode about 2 weeks ago or a week ago.
Yes. Man, I mean, you're doing a great job. I listened to the one on like the World AIDS Day, and like
Yes.
that conversation was, I was like, wow, just her story and just everything that she was able to overcome, and just like her, positive attitude. And I think it was just such a necessary conversation, because there's so much stigma just globally, about like HIV and AIDS. And then especially back home, like, geez, like people just don't want to talk about it. Um, but I think you kind of pushing that out there was super.
Because even for me, sitting there and listening, I live in Zambia. Knew I knew that people have myths about how they can cure themselves, but I didn't know it ever involved disabled people. And that's also because of my own bias. I'm not a person living with a disability. So of
Mm,
course I kind of don't know that. But of course I also should know that. You know what I mean?
right. It's yeah, there's just so many layers to it, and I just, yeah, really appreciated you putting that out there. I think it's one of those things that we can stop where, like, I don't know what the term is when they're saying like no new infections. It's like we can end it, really, but it's like we have to be able to talk about it, and we have to be able to like just say like, okay, this is what it is, it's here. um People have it, like let's accept the fact that it just exists, and then let's figure out how we can go about educating people, you know really making sure people are careful, like taking away the stigma
Yeah, I
surrounding
think
it. And
it's like my guest on episode 11 in Sofa said, it should be a conversation we have every day. We shouldn't just wait for World AIDS Day. We shouldn't just wait to get another year of bad statistics or another month of it. Because right now, I've actually been working on a documentary that deals with HIV infection rate in adolescent youth in Zambia. And the stats are staggering and shocking. And the different reasons of why this is occurring are also just like based in so many like myths, misconceptions, lack of education, lack of sensitization. And you're just like, guys, how long have we been dealing with HIV and AIDS as a problem as a
mm,
nation? But like, clearly we've not done a good job in explaining things in our messaging. Because in the 90s, or even, yeah, the 90s, like the posters you would see were so scary. And then also the community sort of plays or whatever surrounding it to do with the messaging will always, there's like a very famous thing where it's like, AIDS, AIDS, you killed my mother, you killed my father. Like,
oh, I remember that.
yeah. So
Yeah.
like there's been so much sort of damaging messaging that's been done. And then there's also been like a large gap of time where there's basically been, I would say, as a country, a bit of silence on the subject matter.
Mm.
Unless someone's an NGO and actively going into a community, or people are here just conducting research, which doesn't include sensitizing people or educating people. They're just here to collect data. It's not helping the situation, because then we're not actually having these conversations. And if we still want to be, oh, we're a Christian nation, but we're not going to discuss sex in any capacity, or we want to debate whether our kids should be taught about sex in school, if there should be sex ed. It's like, yes, there definitely should be. And also at home, these conversations need to be had, because HIV is a reality.
Right. And it's like the danger in that stigma is like people feel like there's shame surrounding like just everything that has to do with like sex. And then people don't feel, like here, like a lot of the messaging now is knowing your status empowers you. Like, it's better to know. Like, do you know your status? Have you checked your status? And it's like those are the types of conversations people are having. So it's like for you to even be afraid to check your status, like that's an issue. Because if
Yeah.
you're afraid, you could have it and then you're passing it on. And then, communicating with a partner about sex is already hard enough, let alone you add this element to it, and the possibility of, having an STI. It's just so messy, but I enjoyed the conversation, and I think we need to have more of those for sure. So thank you so much for tuning into episode 53 of the show. I hope you all enjoyed that episode. I know Lee and I talked about a little bit of everything, but I really hope that you took something away from that and learned more about the creative scene in Zambia. and the amazing conversations that Lee is having on her podcast, Conversations with Leelabee. Be sure to check out the link in the show notes for a link to where you can listen to the podcast. And again, don't forget to leave Dear Diaspora a review on Apple Podcasts, and we will talk to you next year.